Proverbs 22. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. I want to stop right there and talk about the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is a theme that we see a lot in Scripture, especially in the Proverbs. And I've always felt like there's a lot of power in the fear of the Lord, but because the fear of the Lord is tied to a lot of promises, this is just a perfect example. Riches and honor and life are tied to fear of the Lord. So it's basically like an if-then. If you have this, then it equals this. And so we know that the fear of the Lord has a lot of benefit. Like if you have the fear of the Lord, you have wisdom, you have this, that, etc. But the question is what is the fear of the Lord? And I've come to the point where I understand the fear of the Lord to be pretty simple. It's just basically doing what's right. It's turning away from what you know is wrong. The fear of the Lord is like not taking the risk. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you're tempted to do something, there's this conscious thought that you have inside that there's a risk. So an example would be if you wake up and you don't feel like going to work, you might have the thought like, if I don't go to work on time, what is my boss going to do? And that's kind of a simplified version or a simplified example of the fear, right? So in terms of our spiritual life, that looks like, okay, if I maybe there's someone in your phone that you shouldn't be messaging because you're married, and you have a thought like, what is God going to do about this? Or what does God think about this? That right there is like the fear of the Lord, and it stops you from doing things you know you shouldn't do because you fear the outcome. You fear the Lord. You fear what he will think or what he will do. So that kind of keeps you on the straight and narrow. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from them. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender. This verse 7 right here, I feel like this is a good verse for this day and age because we see a lot of debt. I think there's a statistic that 80% of transactions in the United States is debt. And so if we just stop for a second and think, like, whenever I become in debt to someone or something, I'm a slave to that person or thing. So if you're racking up credit card debt or what have you, it might seem harmless in the moment, but the truth of the matter is that debt is like a form of slavery. You're basically you enslave yourself to whatever is owed. He who sows iniquity will reap sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. And I find it interesting here that they say a generous eye, because when we think of generosity, we don't really think of an eye, but I think it means kind of like the opportunities that you see, or you see the opportunities to be generous to someone. So when it says he who has a generous eye, it's like you're not hiding yourself from the opportunities, but you see the opportunities. So if someone needs something, you see that opportunity to meet that need, and you meet the need, and in that there's blessing. For he gives of his bread to the poor. So again, that's the concept. Like, okay, you might see, oh, this person's in need, and you give what you have to meet that need of the person. Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease. He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend. This is a really encouraging verse, and it's kind of like a feel-good verse, but it's just amazing to know that just if you love something, the things that you love, God knows and God sees it, and he rewards it. And I think sometimes we get tied a little bit too much into behavior. When we read scripture, or when we read the Bible, or as we walk with the Lord, we tend to think of our journey, and we tend to think of our walk with God in the context of behavior. But sometimes God looks beyond that, and he looks more at our heart. And right here is a perfect example of that, because it says he who loves purity of heart. He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips. And that reminds me of the verse that says, out of the abundance of the heart, out of the treasure of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? I think that's in Luke. The king will be his friend. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, and he overthrows the words of the faithless. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge. That's an interesting verse. I guess I'll ask, what's the first thought that comes to your guys' mind when you hear that? Because it's kind of different language than what we use, right? That's not really something you would hear someone say. Like, the eyes of this person are preserving knowledge. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless. I feel like that verse deserves a little bit of meditation, a little bit of stopping and thinking. What is this trying to say? The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless. I'm going to go ahead and move on from that verse and meditate on it for a while, and feel free to leave a comment and help us try to figure out what that verse means. That's kind of tricky, and I don't want to jump into any conclusions. So I'll jump to verse 13 and leave that one on the back burner. The lazy man says, "There is a lion in the streets. There is a lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets." And that's one of my favorite verses in this chapter. It just it's just funny to me, because it's not it's not really something that I don't think would happen, right? There's a lion outside that will be slain in the streets, but it might seem like a funny example, but the truth of this verse is, it goes into the mentality of the lazy man. And the lazy person fears danger. A lazy person will convince himself not to do something because of fear. And sometimes we don't realize that we are this lazy man, right? We're in the comfort of our home or of our bed, and we know as men that we feel obligated to work, we feel obligated to make progress, we feel obligated to increase our value, to learn, to do projects, to get stuff done. I feel like a lot of us can relate to that. And sometimes we fail to use our potential, and we fail to make the most of our opportunities because we fear that, oh, this is going to go wrong, that's going to go wrong. I'll give a perfect example. I was training at this gym, at an MMA gym, and they had this younger guy. He was probably 19, and he said he wasn't going to train during the winter. And I was like, why? What's up? Why are you not going to be training this winter? And he said, oh, because the roads are bad. The roads are bad, and he didn't want to drive on the bad roads, and because this was in Colorado, and the roads do get bad. That's the same as this verse. Lazy man says there's a lion outside, and it's just like that. Laziness has a way of making us find excuses. Like, we find excuses why we can't do something, and we even convince ourselves that, oh, I'm not going to go do this or go do that because it's dangerous. And it's like, okay, well, part of being a man and being a contributor is to face danger, right? The mouth of an immoral woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there. Careful. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. I feel like this is such a good reminder. So my dad in 2008, he moved us to Belize to start an orphanage, and my dad works with a lot of kids with different traumas and different situations, and sometimes he gets burnt out or frustrated because he's trying to teach these kids the right way, and he's trying to raise them up to be children of God and to be God-fearing people. And he gets frustrated sometimes because he doesn't see the progress that he wants to see. And I remember I showed him this verse a couple of years ago, and surprisingly, one day he brought it back to me, and he was like, yeah, he's like, foolishness is bound up in their heart. And it allowed him to kind of compartmentalize and just face the reality that kids are kids. Like, sometimes as a parent, we can get frustrated when our kids do stuff because we know that we've taught them otherwise, we've taught them better. But at the end of the day, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and that's just the nature of life. We were the same way at one point. We had foolishness bound up in our heart, and it caused us to do things a certain way. So I think this is a good verse for parents to just have understanding towards their children and to realize that kids are kids. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. But although there's that foolishness in the heart of a child, it's encouraging us to correct our children. And it says rod here, so I feel like it is important to be firm and to have, to not just like tell them to do this or do that, but discipline them and be firm. He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. This is a concept that I feel like we don't really talk about a lot. Giving to the rich. I never, until I read this verse, I never once had the thought in my mind that it was wrong to give to the rich. But if you think about it, it's kind of a waste of resources. And I find it interesting in this Proverbs 22 that it mentions giving to the rich. And I had to stop and think about life and the times that maybe I've done that. And I think I see other people do it sometimes too, where maybe you have a friend who's kind of wealthy and like, you know, you give gifts to that friend or whatever because they're your friend. And I feel like sometimes it's like it feels good. It feels better sometimes to give to the rich than it does to give to the poor, because the rich can give something back, right? Like when you give something to someone and it's like, okay, in your mind you're kind of expecting, all right, I'm on his good side or whatever, in the future he can give something back. Whereas if you give to the poor, and if you give to someone needy and you give to someone broke, dead broke, you're probably not going to get anything in return. So that's kind of a more sacrificial giving compared to giving to the rich. And I think that's kind of why it looks down on giving to the rich. Now we're going to jump to verse 17. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. For it is a pleasant thing if you keep them within you. Let them all be fixed upon your lips, so that your trust may be in the Lord. I have instructed you today, even you. Have I not written to you excellent things of counsel and knowledge, that I may make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you may answer words of truth to those who send you? Do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. Now, when I read verse 22, do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is corporations and businesses that take advantage of people. Like, for instance, I was on the phone with my sister the other day, and this is a real world experience that she had. She's a server, and she works for a restaurant in Colorado, and they have multiple locations. And she does breakfast shift, and she had a table, and they had a gift card or whatever, and this is a new job for her, so it's not like she's, knows all the ins and outs of this business. And they used a gift card, and then they still had a balance that was due after they used the gift card, but she didn't realize it when she was doing the transaction, closing out the table. And so it came back later that she still had a balance owed on that ticket, and her bosses were pretty much saying like, all right, she went to the manager, and the manager pretty much said like, hey, you're gonna have to cover this one, it's gonna come out of your pay. And she was surprised because she said, well, wait a minute, no one ever trained me how to use the gift cards, and to make sure that the full balance is paid. So it's like, I mean, I kind of, not trying to pick favorites here, but I stand on her side with that one, because if she wasn't trained, then how would she know? Like, why should they find fault if she's not trained and doesn't know? There's no mercy there. There's no grace there. There's no, like, I feel like the right thing would have been for them to say, okay, look, we're not gonna cover you if this happens again. We understand that you weren't trained, and this is what you should have done. But there was no mercy in the first initial mistake, and that's where I kind of have a problem with it. And I say, and it reminds me of this verse where it says, like, robbing the poor, and it's like, we see it a lot in bigger corporations where they just have no mercy. And they just take advantage of people whenever and however they can, if it means that they can make more money or profit. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. So I really like this, because it's encouraging knowing that the Lord will stand up and plead the cause of those who are taken advantage of eventually. And he's going to avenge those who have been taken advantage of. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. So, this is something that I feel like you just have to take and really stop and think, like, you know what? Who am I hanging out with? Who am I spending time with? Who are my friends? Who am I allowing to influence my life? And who am I allowing to mold me and shape me, right? Because your friends, like it teaches us right here in this verse, your friends, they have a way of affecting you. And it says, lest you learn his ways. Like, I mean, I know we've kind of heard this concept before, like, you are who you hang around and who you spend time with. And so I feel like this verse is just reminding us to be careful who we allow to be our friend and who we call a friend, because it's a snare, it's a trap. It's not worth it. And you have to have boundaries. You have to be able to say to yourself, like, you know what, this person is not the type of person I want to be, so therefore it's probably not wise for me to be friends with this person, especially if they're angry and furious and they have outbursts of anger. Stay away. Don't convince yourself, oh, I can change them. No. Not worth it. It's too risky. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, or one of those who is surety for debts. This verse really reminds me of the verse that says, there's a story of two men who say, hey, we're going to go to such and such city for a year or two, and we're going to make a profit. We're going to buy and sell and trade, and then after a while, we're going to go to this other city, and then we're going to do likewise, etc., etc., etc. And Jesus says, you know, you should say, if God wills, we'll go to this city, and we'll do this or that business, and we'll buy and sell and trade. And he's very clear that he doesn't want us to just always assume that everything's going to work out, because he says you don't know what a day is going to bring. And I feel like there's a lot of sound wisdom in having the humility and just saying, you know what, I'm not You don't shake hands with people. You don't make a pledge. You don't promise, oh, promise this or promise that. As little as possible, you just don't do that. Avoid it, because you don't know what a day will bring. You don't know what a week will bring, a month will bring. You don't know what your situation is going to look like down the road, and it's just not worth putting yourself at risk of tarnishing your reputation, like it says in the beginning. Verse 1, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And it's not worth harming your reputation because you made a promise to someone that you can't keep. It's just not worth it. And I know sometimes it takes courage and it takes some balls to just say, you know what, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, like if someone asks for you to be, co-sign on something, or someone wants you to do something and make a promise, and sometimes you just have to say no, and it's hard to say no, but it's the right thing to do. And I know we have the heart to help people, and we have the heart to be there for others and whatever, but you have to have wisdom, you have to have integrity, and you have to just be willing to put your foot down and say no. And that's perfectly fine. Not just because we're Christians, that means we have to help everyone all the time, 24/7. We can never say no. Not just because we're Christians or followers of Christ, that means that we have to always be making promises. My dad has a saying where he said, sell dreams, like people who sell dreams, like they tell you this, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to buy you a car, they're going to help you with your business and all this other stuff, and then they end up doing none of it. Like they say it with their words because it feels good to use your words and promise people stuff, but then following up is a lot harder than what you actually think, so it's not worth it. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, and one of those who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? And that's just going back to the whole principle of like avoiding debt, because you become a slave. If you don't have anything to pay and you're just going off of, like, for example, this is the thought process that caught me and got me in a lot of debt. I had the thought process that I spent money I didn't have because I convinced myself that I'll make money in the future to pay it off. That is a very risky way to handle your finances, because you're not guaranteed to make money in the future. You might feel like you're going to, right? Like let's just say you have a job and you're knocking down $8,000 a month, and it's been steady for a few months or years. Just because it's been steady for a few months or years doesn't guarantee that it's going to be steady for the next few months or years. And that's something where you just have to be honest with yourself and be willing to have the discipline to say, you know what, I know the world is doing this because the world does it. The world gets into debt. People who live in the world have no issue with debt. It's not seen as really something bad. I mean, it's seen as something bad, but it's like being accepted. Like people are starting to accept it. Like, oh, it's normal. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's acceptable. It doesn't mean that God wants you to live in that way. And so you have to have the discipline to say, you know what, I'm going to fear God and I'm going to do what I know he wants me to do, which is to stay out of debt. I know the numbers and people on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, all these financial gurus are going to say, oh, you can use debt to make money. And yeah, that might be true, but the end goal here is not to make money. The end goal is to live in a way that's pleasing to the Father and to reflect who he is, and Debt is not a part of that. Debt is not in his way of doing things. It's not his way of doing things. His way of doing things is to avoid debt. So sometimes we have to have the humility to say, you know what, this might not be the way that I feel like is best, but it's the way that he wants me to do it, so I'm just going to do it that way and be humble. Do not remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. I love that. He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. That's it. Thanks for watching.